Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the debut album from Bea Miller, titled Not an Apology. So as some of you probably know, I'm 25 years old. I got a full-time job beyond all this. I pay rent in my own apartment, I buy my own groceries, I do my own laundry. And even by the nebulous way that most people tend to define my generation, I can marginally be defined as an adult. But even as I get older, pop music tends to stay the same age, which is now leading into the situation where I'm reviewing music that might speak to experiences almost a decade disconnected from my own. Now, in theory, that's not a problem. Music can pass barriers of race, class, gender, and sexuality, and age isn't as much of a barrier as you'd think. Hell, look at neo-traditional country and how well that works with me. But I'll admit feeling a little bit hesitant covering Bea Miller, mostly because warning flags began popping up all over the place. Coming in 9th on the second season of X Factor, signing in the first ever joint venture between Siimon Cowell's Syco Music and Hollywood Records, and all of it at the age of 16. On the one hand, there's a certain gut reaction of surprise, but then again, thanks to YouTube and Vine and the ease of creating content skewing younger and younger, I'm not all that surprised. Hell, even though she wrote less than half the songs on her debut album, she's probably got a firm hand in her pop career at this point given who she's touring with. And besides, teen starlets have existed before. I shouldn't be all that fazed by this. No, my flags are more tied to the presence of Siimon Cowell and Syco Music, a label that does not have a good quality and reputation with me in bringing out good music. Most thanks to bland, regurgitated production that is the definition of formulaic. At best, you get acts like Ella Henderson who can rise above it, but at worst, you get Cher Lloyd or Fifth Harmony, the former of which only started improving when she tore away from Siimon Cowell's clutches. And that was my big worry going into Bea Miller's debut album titled Not an Apology. Was I proven wrong? Well, unfortunately, I really wasn't. At this point, I'm flat out considering a boycott of Syco Music on the basis of their production alone, because this album is another classic example of a pop debut that should have shown off a lot more promise than it ends up doing. To put it another way, Not an Apology by Bea Miller mostly has good intentions, but it's a complete mess that reflects mismanagement more than actual lack of talent on display, and that should never happen. One example of this, Bea Miller herself. She's not an immediately striking presence behind the microphone, I can admit that, in the same way that similar teen starlets like Lorde were, but I reckon some of that will come with time and experience. She needs a little bit more seasoning, and I definitely appreciate that she takes a hand in writing that does come together with a few nuggets of unique wit that I like. Most of the writing on this album is pretty bog standard teen pop, a few inspirational ballads, a few love songs, a few breakup songs, and plenty of attempts to establish Bea Miller as your underdog teenage starlet, as you want to do. And while I found attempts to get darker to be absolutely hilarious, I mean, Dracula might have been imported straight from a Hot Topic jingle, songs like Paper Doll, Enemy Fire, and Perfect Picture are pretty solid when it comes to teen pop anthems when measured on that standard, even showing hints of nuance and solid poetry with lines like, "Is it true, hurt people, hurt people?" And yet the lack of consistent writers definitely shows, because again, it's hard to define who Bea Miller is on these tracks. Is she the earnest, inspirational balladeer who fights to the underdog? Is she the girl who can handily dump guys who behave like preening, abusive dicks? Or is she the starstruck girl who yearns for popularity and romance? It's the last category where the writing definitely takes a turn for some of the questionable, with the rich kids thrashing overprivileged snobs looking down on her, even when she is successful and nouveau rich, but then yearning for their acceptance and trying to rationalize their humanity. It reminds me a lot of the same problems that hit Echo Smith's song Cool Kids, and that it tried to tell both sides of the story and couldn't capture either completely and just ended up underwhelming me. And Force of Nature raises even uglier questions. Yeah, I get being love struck by this bad boy, but describing him as a bad, sick situation and that she'll be left broken afterwards and that he's just a force of nature and thus not held accountable for his actions? Yeah, that's all kind of questionable. Might be sending some mixed messages there. And you want to know the really exasperating thing? It's one of the few songs on this album where the production didn't completely suck, riding on a surprisingly textured acoustic groove that actually sounds really solid. A look through the line of producers Syco gave Miller is just dispiriting, because the only one who brings this album anything close to remote fire is Busby on Enemy Fire, the only song that comes close to actually rocking with the bright, energetic riffs that sound really good. But with the rest, time and time again, we run into percussion placed way ahead of the melody, any guitars crushed and compressed into the upper end of the mix, a near complete lack of organic drums or solid bass lines to give Miller's vocals some real foundation in the low end of the mix, and all of it played with a staccato lack of groove that means the album loses whatever flow it tries to pick up from the guitar's low end. Now, to be fair, there are some moments that do have a little bit of potential here. The choppy riff on Fire and Blood, the piano fragments on I Dare You, and Paper Doll, and the actual bass guitar on This Is Not an Apology, which might as well double as a title track. But too often the production feels more concerned with building to a pummeling drum drum machine driven chorus that suffocates Miller's vocals and feels increasingly tinny and lacking in depth. At best, you get the reverb saturated Lord wannabe single Young Blood, but at worst, you get songs like I Dare You and This Is Not an Apology, both of which crush their guitars into this buzzy, tuneless slurry, and in the latter case throws on this tinny filter onto Miller's voice, which sounds absolutely awful. It honestly makes me wish that Dracula was a better song, because at least the atonal drone of the synth, the guitar sizzle, and the abuse of vocal filters at least gives it something of a unique personality. If a painfully grating one, it's probably my least favorite song, and because of that instrumentation. But in short, the impression I got from this record is an album that wants to rock a lot harder, even in a pop vein like Avril Lavigne or Pink, but it's forced through a collection of pop producers who prefer to crank up drum machines and reverb than pay any attention to a guitar. And I can't blame Bea Miller for this. She's easily the best part of this project by a mile, or at least the part that gives it any sort of unique personality, but this project rings more as Siimon Cowell dredging anyone left from the X Factor now that One Direction isn't so much of a stable investment anymore. As for Not an Apology as a debut, I'm sorry folks, it's a 5 out of 10 and only recommended if you're a fan of hers. And Bea, since you're on YouTube and you might actually see this, let me give you a word of advice. I believe you can make more interesting and potent music than this, and you don't need to wind up as another casualty of X Factor or Siimon Cowell, because make no mistake, he needs you more than you need him, especially nowadays. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Yeah, a bit of a short review, but didn't have a lot to say. This album didn't really leave much of an impression on me. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.